Well, good morning. This is Barry Jones of Standards Plus History Academy. Uh, if you watched yesterday's episode, I was wearing my red t-shirt because our boys were in the region championship game last night and they won. So they advance to the sub-state game. They get to host. They win that game, they go to state. That's a big accomplishment. I spent 20 years coaching, a little bit more than that, 21, 22 years coaching, trying to get my team to the state. Always came up short, one game short. So it's a big accomplishment for our kids and our coach. So I'm sure we'll be fired up today here at school. All right, today we're continuing with the Clay Shaw trial. And uh, well, we actually didn't actually get to the trial yesterday. We were talking about the backstory and why Jim Garrison did not bring a trial in the immediate aftermath of the assassination. He got shut down by the FBI. So he just sort of let it lie. So the question we want to deal with, that was yesterday's question was, by the way, was Garrison a glory hound? And I think we answered that definitively no. If he was, he would have brought that trial and kind of gone off on his own and done what he wanted to do when all the attention was on him. And he certainly wouldn't have given all his evidence to a three-judge panel to verify uh, what happens today. Make sure that he's on a course that's going to arrive at something that'll be helpful. He's not trying to go on a witch hunt here. So, we talked about that, how the three-judge panel ruled unanimously after they saw his evidence that, yes, you do have a case here. And then when given the choice back in 63, 64, after the FBI released David Ferrie, he dropped the case. So he was not a glory hound. Today's question is, what did Garrison accomplish? Because everybody knows the trial happens at some point and then it falls apart spectacularly with a lot of help. And that's so the question is, what did he gain? What did he accomplish by doing this? One would be remiss to think, well, he didn't get the guilty verdict, he didn't peel the onion and unwind the conspiracy, so therefore he was a failure. That would be a very uninformed position to take, because he accomplished two very important things, or this trial led to two very important developments. A couple pictures here. The one on the top left, the final report of the Assassination Records Review Board, the AARB. I'm not going to say anything about that now because that's one of the conclusions of today. Top right picture is somebody that we're going to talk about quite a bit today. His name is Perry Russo. He's right in the middle. So the guy in the light colored suit, his name is Perry Russo. I'll introduce him to you today. Bottom left is David Ferrie being carted out of his house after he died. We'll talk about that today. Of course, David Ferrie is a prominent figure in assassination literature, research, and the life of Lee Harvey Oswald. He factors in a lot of ways. And then the bottom right is the famous Zapruder film frames that were printed in Time Life magazine. And I'll talk about how that became significant through this Shaw trial as well. So if you're ready, off we go. This is a picture of Dean Andrews. Dean Andrews. If you've watched the film JFK, you know it was played, Dean Andrews' character was played by John Candy, and did so very well, by the way. Dean Andrews, okay, so when we left, the Jim Garrison just dropped the case and moved on with his life. So now we have advanced 3 years down the road. It's 1966. And Jim Garrison's lead investigator, Lou Ivan, these investigators have sources, and they're always talking to their sources about different things. And sometimes just in the course of a conversation, they get a tip on something. It really wasn't what they were seeking at that moment. It just kind of came out while they were pursuing something else. Garrison wasn't, or Lou Ivan was not investigating this particular issue or this particular person. He was just having a conversation with one of the sources. And the source in this case was Dean Andrews. And so they're probably, you know, it's New Orleans. They're probably sitting around having a beer or something. And Dean Andrews admits or kind of just divulges some information that caught Lou Ivan's attention. He said, you know, on November 22nd, I got asked by Clay Bertrand to go to Dallas and represent Oswald. Remember that scene when Oswald's being paraded around Dallas police headquarters? He asked for representation. He didn't have a lawyer. And so Andrews tells Lou, he says, well, actually, I was on my way to go represent him. Clay Bertrand asked me to go represent him. And so Ivan goes back and he tells Garrison this. Garrison, in the meantime, between 63 and 66, had been reading the Warren Report between 64 and 66. And couldn't believe how shoddy it was. And the questions that were asked, the questions that weren't asked of the witnesses. You know, and he was just kind of on a personal journey to learn the truth about the assassination, and he had a lot of questions about it. So he was kind of on a little personal journey, but it wasn't part of his official work. And here comes Lou Ivan, his chief investigator, says, "Hey, you know, there's another New Orleans connection here. You know, we suspected David Ferry and Guy Bannister and all that was going on with Lee Harvey Oswald the summer of 63. That went nowhere. But here's Dean Andrews saying, he was an attorney. That's what he did, saying that Clay Bertrand asked him to go represent Lee Harvey Oswald. So Garrison has a conversation with Dean Andrews. And of course, you know, it's one thing for Dean Andrews to just let it slip while he's talking to his good buddy Lou. It's another thing when the district attorney is trying to get this information out of you. And he wants him to confirm what he said. He goes, you told Lou this, just tell me the same thing you told Lou. Well, all of a sudden, Dean Andrews just clams up. He won't say anything. And so Garrison says, well, I can make you testify to a grand jury. I can haul you in front of a grand jury. And if you don't answer the questions, I could charge you with contempt of court. If you refuse to testify, or I could charge you with perjury because I can show what you said to Lou. And Andrews got mad. In the movie, they're having this conversation at a restaurant, and Dean Andrews gets up, storms out of the restaurant. Anyway, Andrews decides to go public with this. He says that Garrison is harassing him, trying to bully him into testifying against his will, and he's trying to shame Garrison's what he's trying to do. So Garrison realizes, okay, well, if I'm going to pursue this quietly, I just need to find out on my own, since Dean's not going to tell me, who this Clay Bertrand is. Maybe I can get him to tell me, come at it from another angle here. So he starts going around through all his sources, and he uses his investigators. He says, find out who Clay Bertrand is. They know who he was. Somebody powerful, because he's telling Dean Andrews to go to, Dean Andrews was prepared to get on a plane and go to Dallas, acting on the order of this Clay Bertrand. So who is this Clay Bertrand? So all these investigators and Garrison fan out across New Orleans, and they go to their regular sources, and no one will say. And it's almost like they know, but they won't tell it. I mean, they're going down into the French Quarter and talking to the sexual deviants of the city who were sources for them, the criminals of the city that were sources, business owners, prominent people. Everybody thinking, and nobody either knows or they won't say. This goes on for months. And of course, if you're an investigator, this just whets your appetite. This doesn't dissuade you. This doesn't alter your course any. Might delay it, but you really want to know now. It seems to be this big mystery. And Dean obviously got spooked where he won't tell you now. Well, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he gets this letter uh, in the mail from a man named Perry Russo, who I had pictured on that first page, first slide, the guy in the cream colored suit. And he says he knows who Clay Bertrand is. He says he witnessed Clay Bertrand, David Ferry, Oswald, and some anti-Castro Cubans conspiring to kill JFK at a party. Oh, wow. So Garrison meets with this Perry Russo. He's a 25, he's a pretty young guy, New Orleans insurance salesman, and pretty quickly figures out that Perry Russo has been in a kind of like this secret society that was in New Orleans of gay people, gay men, young gay men in particular, like Perry Russo, who were kind of farmed out as partners for hire, I guess, for all these prominent homosexual men. And evidently, there was this underworld going on in New Orleans, and Perry Russo was part of it. And at one of these parties where he was there to provide entertainment, if you get what I mean, for these prominent people at this party, he witnessed this conversation. And he witnessed all these people, and he knows who Clay Bertrand is. And so they finally get around to it, and Jim Garrison says, well, who is it? And he says, well, Clay Bertrand is Clay Shaw. He uses Bertrand as a alias when he is operating in his you know, gay lifestyle. In other words, he's got a secret life. In his public life, as this baron of trade, world trade that's coming in through his trademark, he's Clay Shaw. In his secret life, when he's hanging out with guys like me, he's Clay Bertrand. And evidently, he's got lots of gay friends. Of course, we've already learned that David Ferry was gay. It's the reason why he got kicked out of he was studying to be a Catholic priest. He got kicked out for his they call it sexual deviance. He was also fired as an Eastern Airlines pilot for sexual deviance. And of course, we learned that he used the Civil Air Patrol as a recruiting ground for his pedophile lifestyle. A lot of, basically, he was a criminal, but it was because he was having sex with underage boys is what he was doing. I think I told you the story. The end of his Eastern Airlines career happened because he was taking boys up into his plane and putting the plane on autopilot, letting it fly around while he was having sex with these underage boys. And Eastern Airlines found out about it. So that's David Ferry. Okay. So Russo was in that mix, and evidently Clay Bertrand or Clay Shaw was as well. But to hide his identity, because he had a lot of money at stake. He was a prominent businessman, and in the '60s, this wouldn't have been something you'd want the public to know. So he had this alias, Clay Bertrand. This is a picture of the trademark, the international trademark. If you'll notice on the top of that trademark, you have all those flags. Those are flags that Clay Shaw did business with, flags of countries that Clay Shaw, through this trademark, did business with. And you can see there's a lot of countries represented there. That's why it's called the international trademark. And as I explained before, the New Orleans is a really important trade city anyway. It's a port city, and all of the goods from America can flow down through the Mississippi into New Orleans very easily and out for export but it's also an import city. So strategically located. And this is Clay Shaw's moneymaker. This is why he's so wealthy. So he's protecting this by having this alias, Clay Bertrand. So Jim Garrison decides to pursue this case with Perry Russo's testimony. If he can get a David Ferry confession, now that he has evidence, the first time he talked to David Ferry, he didn't believe his story about why he went to Dallas. And if he can get David Ferry to confess, because David Ferry knows he's got Perry Russo, who has him conspiring to kill the president at a party. This is that peeling of the onion. He's going to revitalize that strategy. If he's got Perry Russo's testimony, if he can use that as a cudgel to leverage David Ferry into a confession, that would force Shaw to talk. And Shaw, he recognizes as the boss of this New Orleans contingent. If he can get Shaw to talk, maybe that can get them higher up in the food chain. So you blow up the conspiracy one person at a time. So you're starting at the bottom with Perry Russo, and you try to get Dayton. The next target's going to be David Ferry. And so that becomes the whole essence of the trial. When he indicts Clay Shaw and takes that evidence to the 3-judge panel, he's got enough evidence to at least have a trial. That's what indictment is. An indictment is a formal charge. You have enough evidence to at least have a trial. It doesn't mean you're guilty. So he takes that evidence to the 3-judge panel. He says, I've got this testimony from Perry Russo. I've got my own interrogation of David Ferry a few years ago, which clearly he lied, because now I've got Perry Russo's testimony putting him at this party with Clay Shaw, and David Ferry's there, Perry Russo's there, and all talking about assassinating the president. So I've got David Ferry at least caught in a lie, and I can get him to confess. And Clay Shaw is there, and he's the one that ordered Dean Andrews to go represent Lee Harvey Oswald. And of course, Lee Harvey Oswald was in Guy Bannister's The Newman Building all summer with David Ferry. So he says, this is a conspiracy. And I don't believe it ends in New Orleans, but I believe it started in New Orleans. And I would like to charge Clay Shaw with this, try him, but it's going to be contingent on getting Perry Russo on the stand, getting a confession from David Ferry and have him be my star witness. And then just peel the onion from there. The problems he ran into as soon as the trial started was that Clay Shaw denied that he was Clay Bertrand, which wouldn't be a huge problem if you've got, I'm sure he anticipated that Clay Shaw would deny that, but he's got Perry Russo in his back pocket. He's also got a police fingerprint card. And we'll get to that in a minute. But he was hoping that he could get some of the other folks that were in that gay underground community. Once he got Perry Russo, he was hoping that some of these other people in that same gay underground community would come out and confirm what Perry Russo said. But there was a pattern to it. They all said, no, we're not going to testify against Bertrand. We're not going to confirm anything. So, now Perry Russo becomes even more important. If he'd had confirmation from these other witnesses, you're not completely reliant on Perry Russo, his say so. There was also a police fingerprint card when Shaw was arrested. He was indicted, he was arrested, he was taken downtown, processed. And as he was being processed, there was a police officer who was taking his information. Shaw was sitting there, and he's just asking him name, address, do you have any aliases? And on the fingerprint card, Shaw, when asked what his alias was, replied, Bertrand. So it's right there on the police fingerprint card. This is not an interrogation. This is just processing. And so he planned to use this in court in Clay Shaw's own words. he was confessing to the police officer during processing that he did have an alias, and his alias, his name was Bertrand. You really don't need those witnesses. You got Perry Russo and you got Clay Shaw's own words. But the judge ruled the police fingerprint card inadmissible because he said Clay Shaw didn't have an attorney present when he admitted that Bertrand was his alias, which was, it's one of these ways you can rig a trial. The judge can just come up with some cockamamie ruling like this. This is not an interrogation. We all understand you have a right to an attorney when you're being interrogated. There was no precedent for having to have a lawyer present while you're being processed. But that's what the judge said. So, and the judge makes the rule. So, you know, you can imagine being Jim Garrison, you're counting on that fingerprint card. Shaw answered a question. It was his own words, and it's on an official document. It's part of the evidence. It's just open and shut. This is who Clay Bertrand is. It's Clay Shaw. Said so in his own words. So now that even makes Perry Russo more important. So you can see all of a sudden Russo, who Jim Garrison knows because of his lifestyle, could be impeached on the stand. All right. It's you know, people might not believe him. So you're hoping you can get these other witnesses to confirm. You're hoping you can use this fingerprint card. And now that that's gone, Perry Russo is all you got. So you put Perry Russo on the stand, and, you know, he's a young guy, and the lawyer, the defense lawyer for Clay Shaw, got him trapped on the stand. This was Jim Garrison's big fear. And Perry Russo was unclear or deceptive in one of his answers. You know, you can imagine he's trying to hide, you know, he didn't ask for this. He just was answering. He just volunteering some information, trying to help Jim Garrison. Now he's at the center of this maelstrom. and he got trapped on the stand and basically discredited in the trial. So now the jury is questioning Perry Russo's testimony. And you got Perry Russo, who was this young guy who's in the gay underground community, admits to it, and basically is a male prostitute is what he is. You going to listen to him, or you going to listen to Clay Shaw, who owns the international trademark and is sitting there all distinguished looking and denying everything? He said, he said. So Garrison now is, he has hidden away his star witness, David Ferry, and he has been able, through various interrogations of David Ferry, to get David Ferry to admit to things and promise to admit to these things on the stand. David Ferry is going to be the surprise witness that is, you know, Clay Shaw is not anticipating. He is going to be the nail in the coffin for Clay Shaw. He is the star witness. And there's that famous scene in the movie where David Ferry, who's, I can't remember the name of the actor who plays him, but he does a phenomenal job. The mob guy, the little short guy, I can't remember his name, but he's, the news comes out. Somehow it gets leaked to New Orleans State's item who the star witness is. And it's David Ferry. Right, 1 week before the start of the trial, big headlines paper about David Ferry. And of course, everybody in New Orleans is familiar with David Ferry. He's going to testify against Clay Shaw. Holy cow, this is going to be good. And of course, David Ferry is apoplectic. He loses his mind. He calls Jim Garrison. They've got him in protective custody, or, you know, they're preparing to take him into what's happened is Lou Ivan is trying to convince Jim Garrison to put him in protective custody. David Ferry is very, very paranoid that he's going to be killed. He says, he's on the phone talking to Lou, and he says, you know what this means? You know what this means? And he's talking about that headline. He goes, this means David Ferry is a dead man. I'm a dead man. That's what that means. I'm a dead man. And they were used to the hysterics of David Ferrie. And so Garrison even admitted later he probably should have taken it more seriously, uh, what David Ferrie was telling him, because 5 days later, uh, he you'll see why here in a minute. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag too soon, but now the public knows. Okay, now the public knows what who the star witness is. Perry Russo has already been discredited. The witnesses in the gay community haven't worked out, and uh, the fingerprint card didn't come through for him. So now everything's hinging on the testimony of David Ferrie. Of course, I'll go ahead and tell you. I mean, I don't think it's any big secret. David Ferrie, 5 days later, was found dead in his apartment, and that was that picture I showed you on the first slide of him being toted uh, out of his apartment. And of course, we'll talk about what they rule it a suicide, but we'll come to that in a minute. Let's go back to Garrison for a second. Garrison, again, remember how big he is. You can see him pictured here, how tall he is around people, normal sized human beings. Jim Garrison towers over everybody. Garrison had become a larger than life figure, no pun intended, in New Orleans because he had taken on, and here he is in the Shaw trial, taking on basically the establishment, the Warren Commission, the deep state. He doesn't even realize, I don't think, the forces that he's taking on: the CIA, the FBI, all these entities that have a vested interest in protecting the Warren Report. But he's done it before. He got to be DA because he got convictions against 8 New Orleans judges and the mayor, whom he accused of corruption. And his evidence supporting his case eventually made it to the Supreme Court. The Bar Association had barred him they pretty much slapped him with a gag order. He was going around campaigning on the corruption of the city and these judges and the mayor, and he's running for DA, and he was using his evidence against these judges and the mayor to support his case, basically. And the Bar Association basically slapped him with a gag order. So he put his evidence in front of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court eventually ruled in Garrison's favor, which means he was right. And he got convictions against these judges and the mayor. So you talk about a guy who, we hear that term, drain the swamp. There's hardly a city in America more swampy than New Orleans. And I mean that in literal terms and figurative terms. I mean, the corruption in the state of Louisiana is just, if you ever just go back and look at Huey Long and his administration, but it is famous. The state of Louisiana is famous for its corruption. And of course, New Orleans is the cesspool, if you want to say that, of Louisiana. So you figure the corruption is even more intense in New Orleans. And this guy went in there and fought it and triumphed. He got the Supreme Court to side with him. He tried. So he doesn't have, as far as the city itself and maybe the movers and shakers of the city, they know what he's capable of. The CIA knows what he's capable of. The FBI, everybody knows what this guy's capable of. He's basically fearless. And there's all kinds of cases in New Orleans where somebody tries to expose the corruption. Of course, we all know who's pulling the strings in New Orleans behind all of this, like Geppetto. It's Carlos Marcello, and he's not going to let you do that. And so people just end up dead. They just disappear. But Garrison didn't. He fought his way through that publicly, brought in the Supreme Court, and exposed the underbelly of corruption, which was New Orleans politics. So during the trial, now we didn't find out about this until years later. During the trial, one of the things that he's going to try to prove, Garrison, is that Shaw not only is this guy Bertrand, but he's also CIA. And that's his connection. See, if he can prove that Shaw is CIA and Shaw was part of a conspiracy to kill the president, ergo, the CIA was part of a conspiracy to kill the president. And what we find out years later through some declassified documents was that there was a special, quote, Garrison Group. That's what they called themselves. It was a CIA or a group of people that met at least 4 different times in DC, uh, planning a counter attack operation against Garrison in this Shaw trial. And the purpose was to destroy Garrison, destroy his credibility, destroy his reputation, uh, manufacture evidence to bring charges against him, just destroy him so that you can protect Clay Shaw and ergo the CIA. In those same declassified documents, we find out that Shaw was CIA and his clandestine services number was 402-897-A. He was a top CIA operative in New Orleans. He was their top guy in New Orleans. This is why they have the Garrison Group. They know if Shaw is left exposed, the CIA is exposed. That's their guy. Now, we don't know this. Garrison's trying to prove it. Okay. But so he knows it. But the public never learns this, and there's no evidence that comes out as a result of this trial that proves it. And a lot of people thought Garrison was on a wild goose chase, but when these documents come out years later, they're like, wow, Garrison was right. Garrison was right. So what does this Garrison Group do during the course of this trial? Well, they strong-arm judges in different localities around the country. Garrison is sending out subpoenas. For example, he sent a subpoena to Washington, D.C. He wanted former CIA Director Alan Dulles to testify. So he sends out a subpoena to compel the testimony. And the judges would just return the subpoenas back to Garrison unserved. They just ignored them. So, that's one of the tools in your tool chest. If you're a district attorney, to compel testimony, you send out a subpoena. And in normal situations, the subpoenas are processed by the local court, and the person who's being subpoenaed is served. And then you're compelled to testify, or you are guilty of contempt of court, right? So, but now that you think about poor Garrison, he was counting on the fingerprint card that went away. The judge ruled it inadmissible. He's counting on witnesses who are in the same kind of walk of life and know Perry Russo to come confirm what Perry Russo said. That didn't work out. Perry Russo fell apart on the stand. David Ferry is now dead, his star witness. And now any other witness that he's trying to get to come testify, sending out subpoena. If he's outside of New Orleans, he's depending upon these other judges. The CIA is putting pressure on these judges. Just don't serve the subpoena. And then the rat fucking operation. And if you followed my episodes prior, you know what that means. You infiltrate and you destroy it from within. You sabotage it from within. Garrison got overwhelmed. The media attention on this trial. Pretty soon, people were showing up at his office wanting to help, right? And he didn't do a very good job of screening some of these volunteers. Turns out some of these volunteers were sent there on a mission to infiltrate Garrison's office. And the CIA, the FBI actually got inside his offices and put bugs in his phones. They bugged his phones at home. They bugged his offices. So they're going to find out, but it's too late when they find out. They put tails on Garrison, followed him all around. The advantage that Garrison had for a while was everything was hush hush, and he was kind of quietly going about investigating. And as long as it was quiet, he was getting somewhere. As soon as it went public, it all started to fall apart with that headline about Ferry. Ferry is the star witness. And boy, everything just starts to fall apart at that point. The CIA, this Garrison Group, also provided lawyers to help with the defense of Clay Shaw and FBI investigators to dig up evidence, uh, counterattack evidence against Garrison. So what's happened is the CIA recognizes, and the FBI both, and of course, you remember how they helped rig the Warren Commission, right? The FBI gave the evidence that they wanted the Warren Commission to look at. And of course, they had Alan Dulles as the ultimate filter in the Warren Commission itself. And so, everything was sanitized and cleansed, and they went in with a conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and that's the conclusion they came up with. So it worked. Well, they probably didn't anticipate that at the end of the decade they're going to have to do it all over again. In this case, they don't get the advantages that they had before. LBJ's not appointing people that he knows will cover up the real criminals and point the investigation in a certain direction. He's dealing with a wild card. He's dealing with somebody who's already demonstrated he will take on the power brokers in that city. He's not afraid of them. And so they get to this a little bit late. But boy, when they decide to kick into gear, the Garrison Group completely sabotaged. They rat fucked the whole trial. And the fact that he can't get witnesses, the fact that Clay Shaw gets away with denying that he's Clay Bertrand, gets away with denying he's CIA, the fact that Shaw's defense has FBI agents, investigators working on their side, CIA lawyers working on their side, the fact that they know every move Garrison's going to make because they've bugged his office phone, his home phone, they've bugged his offices, they're stealing documents. Some of these volunteers are bringing documents home with them, that making copies of them, taking the originals back. So essentially what that means is Shaw's defense, courtesy of all this help he's getting from the Garrison Group, they might as well be sitting in on the meetings with the prosecution. They know what's happening before it happens. They know what's happening before Jim Garrison knows. And then the media gets involved. This is part of the Operation Mockingbird, which is CIA, that program in that operation in the 50s to infiltrate the media and plant their people in strategic places in the media so their story gets out, the other story doesn't. So the CIA and the FBI, part of the Garrison Group, part of their strategy was to bully the New Orleans media into, I'm sure Garrison had made enemies along the way as in his job as district attorney. So they start printing all the unfavorable stories about Jim Garrison. Well, then the national media picks up on this. And so during the trial, Garrison finds himself under attack. He becomes the story. The story is no longer Clay Shaw and the conspiracy to kill the president. The story is now Jim Garrison. And his case fell apart. And now his reputation is falling apart, taking a hit. So the verdict comes back, and it was pretty predictable what was going to happen after he lost all his witnesses. The verdict comes back not guilty. Now, according to some of the jurors who were polled afterwards, they said, direct quote, they said that Garrison proved there was a conspiracy. They believed that Garrison was right. There was a conspiracy and Clay Shaw was involved. There just wasn't enough evidence. And that was the point. In a trial like this, you got to have evidence. And so here's a picture, pretty famous picture, Clay Shaw, happy, not guilty verdict. So, you say, well, what good could ever come out of a trial where you're trying to unwind a conspiracy that doesn't work? And the guy who brought the charges and brought the trial is just, kind of ends the trial in disgrace, and everyone's out to get him. It causes problems for him personally. It causes problems for him financially. It causes problems for him professionally. I mean, he becomes a pariah in the legal community. And I remember the show he went out and did Johnny Carson show, and you can find it on YouTube. Even Johnny Carson attacked him, and he's sitting there trying to explain his case, and you can't explain your case, not a case like this, in 20-second sound bites. And Johnny Carson got the crowd behind him, and they just, the word had gone out, and he thought if he went and did the Johnny Carson show, he could counteract through some fancy word, be a wordsmith, so to speak, and counteract all the negative publicity and maybe get back on his footing a little bit. It got worse. It just wasn't an appropriate setting to try to defend himself. And he did pretty good in that setting, but it was pretty clear that everyone was piling on Jim Garrison at this point. It's still to this day is the only trial ever brought in the JFK assassination. I think district attorneys saw what happened to Jim Garrison. It's, boy, I don't want any part of that. And if they had a case, we've talked basically about two district attorneys at this point. The Dallas district attorney, Henry Wade, he jumped into the lone nut pool, the deep end of that pool right away. He came out, gave a press conference after Oswald was dead. It listed like 15 reasons Oswald would have been convicted at trial. He was carrying water for the assistant attorney general, Katzenbach, who sent out the memo. The public must be convinced. And Henry Wade did his job. Well, here you have Jim Garrison, who also did his job. He didn't carry the water for the deep state and all the conspirators. He bucked it, and he paid a very steep price. He was labeled a conspiracy theorist. This becomes a CIA tactic. The word went out to its captured media members, used this term, conspiracy theorist, to delegitimize anybody like Jim Garrison. And that has been used ever since. I promise you, bring up the JFK assassination at a party, talk to somebody about it, and introduce the idea of Lee Oswald not being the lone gunman, and they will immediately, I promise you, within 5 minutes, the words conspiracy theorist will come up. It's gotten to be so mainstream in the American lexicon. If you don't believe 9/11, the government story, if you don't believe the JFK government story, if you don't believe the RFK government story, if you don't believe the MLK government story, if you don't believe the COVID government story, you're a conspiracy theorist. And it's a pejorative term. There's something wrong with you. In 1991, Oliver Stone decided to, of course, I'm sure he made a decision before 1991, but that's when the movie JFK came out in 1991. And it took that many years for somebody to show the American public that Jim Garrison wasn't crazy. And you got to give a lot of credit to Jim Garrison, number one, for bringing this trial, knowing the heat he was going. Probably didn't know the heat he was going to experience, but he knew it wasn't going to be easy. So it took a certain amount of guts to bring it. But you got to give Oliver Stone credit too, because he knew what was fixing to happen. He saw what happened to Jim Garrison, and now by taking up his case and making this movie, he realizes I'm probably going to come under the same kind of attack that Garrison did. He's essentially going to make the same case Garrison was trying to make. He's going to try to make it in a movie. And what was really important about this movie, JFK, is that it showed that Garrison did accomplish something very significant. And it showed that he produced, he was able to subpoena from Time Life the Abraham Zapruder movie. This is new evidence, and this becomes sort of the centerpiece of the movie JFK, showing to the American public, a lot of the American public, they hadn't dug deep to go see the Zapruder film themselves. And so a lot of the American public, by watching the movie, JFK saw the Zapruder film for the first time. But that wasn't the first time it was shown publicly. Jim Garrison was actually able to show this during a trial. And it introduces a new piece of evidence into the JFK assassination research field that hadn't existed before. And all of a sudden, that piece of evidence blows apart. Just with people's own two eyes, they can see that what they're seeing does not jive with what the government has told them all along. Yes, it doesn't help Garrison win the trial, but it does start to change minds, the American people's minds of what they believed, which was based on what the government told them. For the first time, the American people are watching this thinking, I wonder if the government lied to us. And of course, we've talked about the Zapruder film. And I just wanted to point out, you see in this arrow here where he was standing. This is a picture, the famous Mary Mormon photo, looking straight at the grassy knoll right about the time JFK gets shot. And you can see, boy, for someone who has a camera, they're in a really perfect spot. Abraham Zapruder is in a really perfect spot to capture what happens. And of course, Garrison was able to show during the trial the frames. He was able to show the actual footage, slow it down, and show the jurors what happened. And no one has ever seen this. All we know is what the government tells us or what Dan Rather tells us. And so here is the famous kind of like the opening scene of the Zapruder film. The president's limo has just made the turn from Houston onto Elm, and you can see the Stemmons Freeway sign in the bottom right-hand corner. As it goes in front of or behind that, you're going to kind of lose sight of the car for a minute. And this is before any of the shots have happened. You can see JFK still has his arm on the side of the car, and he's relaxed, and he's looking around, and John Connolly's sitting in front of him. So nothing's happened yet. And then fast forward to frame 313. This is when they get from behind the Stemmons Freeway sign on the other side, and here's the fatal shot. The shot that clearly impacts the front of JFK's head. And when you stop it, you can see that it's the front of his head that's getting hit, right? The back of his head is still intact. You can see that because it is literally the split second of impact. And the bullet is frangible. You can see as it is exploding. And then you can see it forces, there's that famous scene in the movie where Kevin Costner, playing the part of Jim Garrison, repeats over and over again. It's going to force his head back and to the left, back and to the left, back and to the left. Here it's forcing it back. You can see the wound. Jackie's responding to him and to the left. And this is frame 320. He's falling now down into her lap, basically. And, it's not a perfect image, but you can see that it sure doesn't look like any autopsy photo that the Warren Commission put out, which showed a completely intact head. So that visual evidence is something that Jim Garrison was able to inject into the JFK research that didn't exist before. And that got a lot, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You can hear people say what they saw, or witnesses talk about what they saw. But when you see it, boy, it just changes. And then when you compare or juxtapose it with what the government said happened and the pictures that the government put in the Warren report, they're not the same. And so now through the medium of Hollywood and the media and movies, Oliver Stone, through this movie, is able to show what the American people had not seen since 1963, almost 30 years. It's been about 28 years that this fable, this hoax has been allowed to be perpetrated on the American people. And like Jim Garrison, who is a courageous guy, we already demonstrated that, him taking on the power elites of the city of New Orleans and winning. Oliver Stone has the same track record. This is a guy who served in Vietnam. Okay, he's not one of these movie producers who talks about war and in the second person or third person. He knows about war. He was there. Uh, he's an Academy Award winning director, producer, screenwriter. One of his famous movies was Scarface. He's done a lot of really tough films, and his films do well. And so, if it had been any other producer, any other director, uh, maybe the film doesn't get the notoriety. And it's like when the Garrison Group realized, oh, uh, our adversary is Jim Garrison, and we're going to have to pull out all the stops because he's tough. Well, the media and Hollywood elites and the intelligence community got involved, realized we're going to have to pull out all the stops on Oliver Stone in this movie because he's tough. And this movie's good. It's well done. I still show it to my students, parts of it, and they still watch it. And because the production value of it's so good, still relevant. It doesn't seem like it's an old movie. 1991 qualifies as an old movie now, but it doesn't seem like an old movie. And of course, Stone gets lambasted. They say, you're not a historian. What right do you have to try to reinterpret or revise history? And Stone's reply to that is history may be too important to leave to the newsmen. Because his point in saying that is the newsmen got it all wrong. And the newsmen are part of the cover up. And maybe it takes somebody like me to expose the cover up. And of course, he's called paranoid. And they accuse him of twisting history, and they call the movie The Big Lie. On and on it goes. And as far as the movie industry is concerned, and the people who control Hollywood, the movie was a flop. But as far as the people were concerned, the movie was a smash hit. It was a smash hit. So Frank Mankiewicz, who was a former Kennedy confidant, saw the film. And he says, quote, every American owes Oliver Stone a debt of gratitude. He kicked open a door that has been closed way too long. And here's to illustrate what Garrison said about the media. He said the political writers, the establishment writers, the editorialists, the thumbsuckers were almost unanimous in attacking the movie JFK because it challenged the work they had done in the 60s, which was very little. So here's a Kennedy insider watched the movie and said, wow, it's powerful. What Garrison tried to do in the trial, but got sabotaged by the Garrison Group, Oliver Stone was able to do in the movie. And so many people saw it, millions and millions of Americans saw it, that the resistance to it, the fight back to it, the blowback from all the predictable people sounded too little too late. And once people saw with their eyes what they saw, it made them look defensive. It made them look like they were reactive. It made them look like they were part of the cover up. And here's a few scenes that one of the famous scenes, top left, is trying to recreate the shoot the way the government said happened in the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. And they showed how, the tree blocking the view, the poor quality of the Mannlicher Carcano and the scope, the impossibility of the shot from distance, moving target, moving away from you. They show all that. It illustrates it. Again, you can hear all that and mentally process it, but until you see it, you don't realize that was impossible. There's no way that could have happened. And then when you see the frame 313 of the Zapruder film in the movie, and you see the president's head react back and to the left, you realize that shot from the Texas School Book Depository is not where that shot came from. Then there's the famous scene of Jim Garrison meeting Mr. X, who is Fletcher Prouty, who we'll talk about later. But Fletcher Prouty is a very, very important witness. He wrote some very important books about what he thinks happened. And he gets wind, this actually happened. He gets wind Jim Garrison's investigation. And this is at a very low moment when Garrison's losing all his witnesses, all his evidence is disappearing. He flies to Washington and he meets with Fletcher Prouty, who is now retired. And Prouty won't let him use his name, but he gives him the whole backstory. And there's the, they're walking along to the National Mall, and he's telling the whole covert history of the CIA and how Cuba changed everything. And because of JFK's resistance to the Get Castro movement, he becomes a target. And that Fletcher Prouty, in his position as liaison between the CIA and the military, it was his job to help set up these covert ops. And he'd done it in 53 in Iran, he'd done it in 54 in Guatemala, and he'd been part of Operation Mongoose, the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. He knew all the players. He knew all the moving parts and how these operations are put together. And he's the one that told Jim Garrison about the presence of a cover story and how all of this is prepared in advance. This is how the CIA works. This is how intelligence works. They prepare a cover story, and then after the event, after the crime, they release the cover story, and it's the diversion. It points everybody to the guilty person that they want to take the fall and away from the actual guilty people. Anyway, it's a fantastic scene. Absolutely tells the story in a movie form of how all these intelligence operations started off being done overseas and were brought home and were now operating domestically. And JFK was the victim of one of these. And famous scene, bottom left, where Jim Garrison is showing Dealey Plaza and how the route got changed and all these. He did a mock-up. He had a little. You can see it's a a mock-up of the kind of like a kit that they put together there in the courtrooms. Everybody can see what he's talking about when he talks about the grass, what he's talking about when he talks about the Texas School Book Depository, the visual representation of that. And then the clincher was when Jim Garrison was able to, and of course Oliver Stone showed this in the movie, basically make a joke of the single bullet theory. And that's when all of a sudden the government's main piece of evidence, which supports the entire Warren Commission, starts to fall apart. It's one thing when people dismiss it and argue against it. It still has some credible parts to it that people will at least acknowledge. But when people start mocking it, making fun of it, you've lost, it's been delegitimized. And that's what happened. Oliver Stone did a great job delegitimizing the single bullet theory. So what is the outcome of the JFK movie? Well, as I said, it didn't become a success in the media arena, but it became a huge box office hit. The public, Oliver Stone put a scroll at the end of the movie where you normally see the credits, and he talks about how the files of the House Select Committee are under seal until 2029. And so many people saw that movie and saw that scroll, they were outraged, and they contacted their congressman, they put pressure on them, on their elected officials. And as a result, Congress in 1992, a year after the movie came out, passed the JFK Assassinations Record Collection Act, which created the AARB Review Board, which began collecting and declassifying thousands and thousands of JFK documents that were under seal and weren't going to be seen until 2029. That's still 5 more years from now. So thousands of documents have been declassified and released to the public as a result of AARB, which came about as a result of the JFK Assassinations Record Collection Act of 1992, signed by Bill Clinton, which came about as a result of the movie. And of course, the movie only came about as a result of the Jim Garrison trial. Oliver Stone based his entire movie on the Jim Garrison trial. The main character, Kevin Costner, plays the part of Jim Garrison. So I started off today asking the question, what did Jim Garrison accomplish? He lost the trial. Did he accomplish anything? Well, he introduced a very significant piece of evidence, which was the Zapruder film. The American people might have known of his existence before, but they'd never seen it. But as a result of Jim Garrison, it's now out there. That was huge. Okay. And the second, and I can tell you, I promise you, the CIA, the FBI, all the Warren commissioners, nobody expected, Dan Rather, nobody expected American people to ever see that. It took a guy like Jim Garrison to get that evidence into the public domain. And then based on that, and his trial, Oliver Stone produced a movie, which millions and millions of Americans saw. And so, yes, the Garrison did accomplish something. He had to fall on his sword. Somebody had to be the sacrificial lamb, and it was him. But he got a piece of evidence introduced, and he got Oliver Stone to make a movie. Now, he didn't go to Oliver Stone and say, hey, make a movie. He wrote a book on the trail of the assassins, and Oliver Stone read it. And based on that book and several other JFK researchers that Oliver Stone began consulting, he decided to tell the story, tell the real story. And he showed the CIA, he didn't call it the Garrison Group, but he showed the CIA working against Jim Garrison, infiltrating Garrison's office. He showed the witnesses being bullied, the judges being bullied. He showed subpoenas being denied. He showed all that. So it's one thing if Jim Garrison goes out and barks at the moon and tells everybody that happened, people are going to say, well, you lost the trial, that's sour grapes. It's a completely different story when Oliver Stone presents all that in movie form. Uh, that has a huge impact where maybe people wouldn't listen to Jim Garrison. Garrison had a huge impact. He's a hero. He brought the trial. He got the evidence out there. Based on that comes the movie, and based on that comes the AARB, which declassifies thousands of documents. So you can see the trickle down of it. He created this domino effect, but somebody had to be up front, push that first domino. It was Jim Garrison. And it only happened because he only picked it up because Dean Andrews made an offhand comment to Lou Ivan that Clay Bertrand had told him to go to Dallas to represent Lee Harvey Oswald. And it's pretty clear once you find out later, as part of these declassified documents, that Clay Shaw was CIA and only even had his own number. And he was the CIA's man in New Orleans, that if they tried this this case again, this time with what has been produced since then, he'd be found guilty. And that ergo would mean that the CIA was guilty, involved in a conspiracy to kill the president. So this is how you get at the truth. You have to chip away and chip away. You have to take setbacks. Sometimes 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. But those 2 steps forward are significant. And then the next person comes along, they take 2 steps forward. And the next person comes along, they take. By the way, I did not cover in detail David Ferry's death. We will, I promise you. I told you after every one of these investigations, I'll go back and talk about significant witnesses who died during that investigation. So I'm kind of saving, I wanted you to know that he did die, but I'm kind of saving the details for that episode when I talk about, kind of like I did after the Warren Commission and all those people that died in the time period before, during, and after the Warren Commission and the Warren Report. I'm going to do the same thing with the Shaw trial. And so David Ferry is going to be my main guy in that. So I'm saving him because there's a lot of evidence there that he did not die of suicide. He was suicided. You know the difference. So anyway, that is the result of the second investigation. It was kind of it was one that came out of left field. The CIA wasn't really prepared to have to rat fuck that. They got caught a little bit unawares, and some progress was made until the Garrison Group was able to kick in gear and stop it. And they did stop it, but they didn't stop the Zapruder film from being released. And 30 years later, they were not able to stop Oliver Stone from making a movie. And they were not able to stop the AARB from being formed, which declassified thousands of documents. So Garrison started a ball rolling downhill that the CIA belatedly jumped in to stop, and they were able to stop him, but they weren't able to stop it. And it is what the American people, the knowledge that was dropped on the American people that caused American people to start doubting the official story. And that doubt is going to coalesce and harden and become, public opinion is actually going to sway in favor of a conspiracy and put pressure again on Congress and in one of our future investigations to reopen the case. So, again, what the CIA hoped and the FBI hoped would harden by now, and everybody would accept as gospel, as fact, that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone gunman. As time goes on, it's actually being chipped away at, and Jim Garrison was part of that chisel. So he's important. And Oliver Stone was part of that chisel as well. So those two guys are important. I kind of put the two together. But, Oliver, without Jim Garrison, there's no Oliver Stone. There's no JFK movie. So Jim Garrison is the primary guy here. So, all right, that's episode 40. What are we, 46 now? I think that's 46. And tomorrow's episode, we'll talk about the fallout from this trial, at least as far as witnesses were concerned, mainly David Ferrie. And then that'll be Saturday. Let's see, tomorrow's Saturday, and then we'll take Sunday off, and then we'll begin with our third investigation and episode 48 on Monday. So I hope everybody has a great weekend. I'll see you tomorrow, and then we'll finish this up, and then everybody have a great weekend. It's supposed to be nice this weekend, so that's good. Until next time, we'll see you. Everybody have a great weekend. Bye.